So late night, August 13 of 2018, there was an alarm or several alarms about cars being put on fire in Västra Frölunda in Gothenburg. This is my hometown. Now, the witnesses that heard these car torchers talk to each other couldn't really make out what they said, but one of the words that were mentioned was yalla. Now, I'm not entirely sure, I don't know Arabic, but I believe the word yalla means hurry up or let's get going, something like that. And Västra Frölunda is just like all the other places where you've seen a lot of burnt cars, a place where there lives a lot of immigrants. Now, unfortunately, not long after, we saw burnt cars in other areas in Vänersborg, Trollhättan, Malmö. There's always burnt cars because there's a lot of immigrants there. And as far as I know, there was also other areas of Gothenburg that saw a few burnt cars, very similar to what happened in Frölunda, only there was normally in most of these other places, there wasn't as many as those 33 that was burnt that very first night. Now, burnt cars is, just like several other crimes in Sweden, something that is relatively new. It started happening about 10, maybe 20 years ago, and for several years, media and politicians were very successful when it comes to hiding the problem. Other immigrant-related crimes are rape, gang rape, sexual assault, calling in an emergency for the sake of throwing rocks and bottles on the emergency personnel, a variety of different robberies and assault. This is something that almost exclusively is done by immigrants, and some of these crimes, depending on what is required in order to organize them, some of them only happens in these areas where there are a lot of immigrants. But despite the fact that immigrants commit a lot of crimes in Sweden and have done so for a long time, one thing about these burnt-out cars really stands out. And that is the fact that this got a lot of attention in media, and even a lot of politicians spoke out about it. And that is very, very unusual in Sweden. For the most part, media tries to hide it as much as they can. They mention a little bit of it, maybe they mention 5 or 10% of the crimes, and they minimize it, and they try to normalize it. So why is it that this time media actually did bring it up? Why is it that this time it created headlines? Well, the fact is simple. They just can't hide it. There were too many witnesses, too many photos, too many amateur videos, so this is something that people would know about anyway, so therefore media can't cover it up. Now, unfortunately, with most of the crimes that are committed by refugees or so-called refugees, because normally they're not, they just say they are, most of these crimes are not as visible. When a group of immigrants rapes a young Swedish girl, then normally this happens in a room with a locked door, and the only ones who sees it and knows about it are the victim and the perpetrators. That is, unless they also film it, which has happened, and in those cases, media actually does bring it up. In many countries in Europe, the discussions and the debates about these problems have come a lot further. England is one of them, but the neighboring countries of Sweden, such as Denmark, and Norway, and Finland, are a lot more strict about immigration because of this, and they also talk about it in a completely different way than we see here. So, how bad is it when immigrants burn, let's say, in this case, 33 cars in a parking lot in the middle of an urban area? Is it really that horrible? Well, yes, it really is bad, but it is far from any of the worst crimes that we see being committed by almost exclusively immigrants. One girl being raped is far worse than 1,000 cars being put on fire. But with Swedish journalists that are almost exclusively self-serving cowards that cares about nothing but their own social status, they can just choose to ignore this and choose to write about something else. And what is also quite disturbing about these burnt cars is that there are a lot of people on the far left that try to make it seem like this is a conspiracy from people on the far right that are doing this in order to create racism. They're, for example, blaming the Swedish political party Sverigedemokraterna, saying that there are either sympathizers of this political party or members of this party who is doing this in order for them to do better in the election of 2018. Sometimes they just use the word extreme right. So this is another case that clearly indicates that Sweden needs to go in a different direction. The immigration policy, the immigration politics needs to change, and it needs to change dramatically. And we, the people, we need to dare to talk to these politically correct liars who say the things that they say, who have the opinions that they have, only for the sake of their own selfish gain. It is easy to be politically correct. It's easy to talk about integration and talk about tolerance as long as it's somebody else's daughter that gets brutally beaten and raped for hours and hours on end by a gang of immigrants. When this happens to somebody else, then it's easy to call others racist or Nazi or fascist. The only thing necessary is the lack of empathy.